Hello, welcome to your small group. Hope you're all doing well. My name's Phil, and it's good to be with you at your small group this evening. You will probably know that at the moment as a church, we are walking through a series of teachings that are exploring the nature and the function of the church. What is the church, and what should the church be engaged in? The way we're tackling this is by taking some of the images, some of the pictures and metaphors that the New Testament uses to describe the church. And we're diving into each of these pictures and exploring them in the hope that they will teach us something about who we are and what we should be doing as a church. This week we explored the imagery of the church as living stones being built up as a house. This is what Peter says in his letter to the church. 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 4, it says this. It says, "You also, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house, as a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ our Lord." This is a verse that is packed full of meaning, packed full of imagery and Old Testament allusions. But at its most basic level, this verse is describing the church using the imagery of stones and a house. The church is made up of living stones that are being built together into a house. Really simple imagery, but really profound. And when we reflect on it, it has so much to teach us about who we are and what we should do. Think about it. Stones being fit together or built together into a house. Now, to get at what Peter's trying to teach us, it's important that we disconnect our minds from the kind of construction process that we are familiar with, in 21st century Britain. When we think about a house being built, we think about bricks, right? We think about mass-produced bricks that are all made by machines. The bricks that your house is built out of are probably all precisely the same size, the same shape, the same color, and the same weight. That wasn't the case 2,000 years ago when Peter was writing this letter. Houses and buildings were made not so much out of bricks, but out of stones. And the stones were all handmade. They were hand formed. And so there were no two stones that were exactly the same shape, exactly the same size and weight. Every stone was different. This is significant because when Peter says that to the Christians, you are all living stones, one of the things I think we need to learn is that just as in a building 2,000 years ago, every stone in that building would have been different, so in the building of the church, every stone, every Christian, every individual is different. Now, a stone on its own, in isolation, is not particularly useful. Neither is it particularly strong, right? You can't use one single stone to do very many useful things. Maybe you can use it as a paperweight or a doorstop, but beyond that, there's not much you can do with one single stone on its own. Likewise, one single stone on its own is not particularly strong. It's actually quite vulnerable, right? If I wanted to destroy a stone, I could do that. I could get a hammer and chisel out and go at it, and I could smash it into 1,000 little pieces. So stones on their own, as individuals in isolation, they're not particularly useful and they're not particularly strong either. But the profound thing about these stones is that when you bring them together, when you begin to lay these stones one on top of another and side by side and bind them together, actually they become something spectacular. They become a glorious house. They become something strong and powerful and useful. That's the imagery that Peter is using to describe the church. as living stones, as we come together, we become something strong and powerful and spectacular and useful. You see, stones in a building, they depend on the stones around them, right? A stone in a building, it draws strength from the stone that's beneath it as it leans its weight upon it, but yet at the same time it gives strength to the stone that is above it, right? And this is a picture of the church. We should be people that are drawing strength from one another, lifting one another up, leaning in to one another. The Apostle Paul says it like this in Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. He says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. You want to know what it means, at least in part, to be the church? You want to know the kind of attitude and character that the Christians that belong to the church should be carrying? It's this. We're all together and we're called to bear one another up, to lift up one another, to support one another, to lean into one another. Paul says a similar thing in Romans chapter 15. It says, we who are strong have an obligation to bear with those who are weak, not to please ourselves. Let each of us please their neighbor for their good, to build them up. It's profoundly challenging instructions from the Apostle Paul. He says, if you are strong, you have an obligation to lift up the weak. You know, in the church, we're made up of all kinds of different people from different backgrounds and at different places in our journey with Christ. Some of you watching this film have been following Christ for decades, and you're mature in the faith. You're strong in the faith because you've followed Christ for long. You've experienced him in many different moments. You have grown in your knowledge of him and in your relationship with him, and so you are a strong follower of Christ. If that's you, Paul says you have an obligation now to lift up those who are weak, to allow those who are weak to lean in to your strength. This is profoundly challenging, and actually it's profoundly countercultural, right? Because how does the world use strength? Most of the time, at least. Strength in the world is a tool to get ahead, you know? Strength is a tool to be better than others, to climb above others, to crush others down, to get more, to be bigger, to get control. Strength in the world's eyes is about climbing on top of others and crushing them down. But strength in the kingdom should be used to lift others up. And this is what the church is called to, as living stones being built into a spiritual house. One of the most powerful examples I've seen of this came in a clip that I saw some years ago. It's a clip of the Brownlee brothers. Many of you are probably familiar with the Brownlee brothers. These are, you know, world-class athletes, and they compete in the triathlon. The two brothers, Johnny and Alistair, and they were running in the World Championship triathlon race in Mexico about 4 or 5 years ago. And Johnny was in the lead, and he was coming into the home straight. He was about to win the gold medal in the World Championship race, and it was in South America, and so it was hot and humid and all the rest of it. And as he's approaching the end of the race to claim his gold medal, he begins to lose strength. He begins to faint. He begins to struggle. His strength begins to seep away from him, and he begins to slow down, and he begins to struggle. And behind him, his brother and another competitor are coming up, and I'll show you what happened. You can watch the clip. Have a look at this clip and you can see what happened. It's a powerful example of what we're trying to talk about today.
Now, Johnny has to win and to be sure of taking the title. And right now he seems to have lost control of his legs. And this is worrying. Oh, and he's starting to slow. And there is a little way to go. There's half a K to go. And Johnny is running out of time and is losing. He's losing his sense of direction. This is worrying. Oh, goodness me. This is a horrible sight. Jonathan Brownlee has lost it now and has staggered to a stop at the side of the course, and Alistair's stopped to help him along. And Alistair is going to try and carry his brother home. Dramatic scenes in Cozumel as the Olympic champion carries his younger brother towards the podium.
Oh my God, I cannot believe what we are seeing here, Matt. Is this allowed? Is he allowed to help his brother? You know, is that part of the rules? I'm not too sure. We've never seen anything like this before.
Unbelievable scenes. Unbelievable scenes in Cozumel. The Brownlee brothers arm in arm, but it's not by way of celebration. Henry Schoeman's celebrating. He's going to win this race in Cozumel out of nowhere. But we have to be concerned about the health of Jonathan Brownlee, and they're not even on the final stretch yet. Schoeman wins in Cozumel. The brothers are coming home arm in arm to finish in second and third, but Johnny can hardly stand, and Alistair is having to drag him across the line and pushing him home for second. Johnny finishes in second. Goodness me, what an incredible conclusion here in Cozumel. I've never seen anything like that anywhere in world sport. Worrying scenes all round.
It's a beautiful picture of what this imagery of the stones in the building is trying to teach us about how we should interact with one another as the church. You see, here's this guy who's losing strength, and his brother behind him, he still has strength left in his body. What does he use the strength that he has left for? Does he use it to win the race, to claim a title, to get hold of the trophy? No, he decides to use his strength not to win the race, but to lift up his weak brother and carry him to the finish line. It's a beautiful picture of the way the church should operate. Those who are strong need to lift up the weak. This is what we should all be about. Stones in a building, drawing strength from others, giving strength to others. And when we begin to live like that, when we begin to carry that kind of mentality and attitude and apply them to our relationships with one another, something beautiful happens. The presence of Jesus is truly made manifest in us, and the watching world is given a window into the gospel. Because this idea of bearing one another's burdens really is an idea that flows right from the heart of God. Because that's who Jesus is. He is the great burden bearer. Listen to the way Isaiah describes him in Isaiah chapter 53. Listen to the language that he used that is connected to burden bearing. Listen, Isaiah 53 verse 4. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God and afflicted. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to our own way, but the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Do you hear the language of burden bearing? He bore our griefs. He carried our sorrows. He was crushed by our iniquities. They were laid upon him. Jesus is the great burden bearer, right? And so when we begin, in response to the commands that we're given in the New Testament, to bear the burdens of one another, to lift up the weak, to lean on one another and to lift one another up, we actually begin to display the very heart of God. We display the gospel to the watching world around us. And when we begin to carry one another's burdens, as we're told to in the scriptures, it's like the presence of God comes and makes itself manifest in our midst. And that's the beauty of this imagery. We're living stones being built into a house. We're brothers and sisters, we're fellow workers, fellow soldiers, leaning on one another, drawing strength from one another, supporting one another. As we do that, we become something strong and spectacular and glorious and useful. That's what Peter is trying to get us towards by using this imagery of living stones being built into a spiritual house. Simple but profound. And what I'd love you to do now in your small groups is just take some time to have a discussion around this. There's some questions that will come up on your screen right now. You don't need to work through all the questions, but maybe you can use them just to trigger your discussion and see especially how these images can not only be understood but be applied within the life of your small group. So have fun discussing. Thank you.